We've all seen the memes, and we've all got the t-shirts based on the memes. But behind the silly meme is an episode of TV that uncovers an interesting dimension of the human psyche and raises deeply philosophical questions about the role of violence in our society. Yes, the meme is funny, but what's the deeper meaning behind the meme and how it, the meaning behind the meme, what does it all mean? The episode, Arthur's Big Hit, is quite possibly the most controversial episode of Arthur to ever air. Few episodes of TV can get people so riled up by the mere mention of them. That's why they say the three topics you should never bring up in polite conversation are politics, religion, and the episode of Arthur where he hits DW. Because you never know if bringing up the episode is going to set off the person you're talking to so badly that they go and write 12 paragraphs about it on IMDb. When this episode aired in 1999, it sent shockwaves through American society. This was Arthur, America's favorite aardvark, or at least in the top 10. How could he punch his 4-year-old little sister? This was the guy that taught an entire generation how to spell the word aardvark.
A-A-R-D-V-A-R-K.
And that knowledge has come in handy basically never. The word aardvark doesn't really come up in day-to-day conversation. Arthur punching his sister was a seismic cultural event. And if you think that's an exaggeration, just take a look at this chart of violent crime in the US. You'll notice that the crime rate was experiencing a precipitous decline throughout the 90s, right up until 1999, the same year that Arthur's Big Hit first aired on TV. Coincidence? Probably. But still, it's hard to overstate how controversial this episode was and continues to be to this very day. Some say Arthur went too far, some say DW deserved that punch. And if you're a more non-violent leaning person like me, you might be thinking, who would say that a 4-year-old girl deserved to be punched? Well, DW deserved that punch. Arthur did nothing wrong. She got what was coming to her. Arthur was clearly justified doing this to DW. DW finally getting what she deserved. Honestly, DW had that coming for years. So satisfying. She had that coming. She had that coming. DW had it coming. She had it coming. She had it coming. Jeez, are these people members of the DW Had It Coming committee? Even a lot of people who approach the topic from an anti-violence point of view are ambivalent about it. They'll say something like, even though it was still wrong for Arthur to hit his sister, we don't feel bad for DW because she acts like a complete brat. Or, Arthur shouldn't have hit her, but right before that, sometimes bullies don't learn until they have the beaten out of them. People are truly conflicted. With this episode being as controversial as it is, and for more reasons than just the punch itself, I feel it deserves a more thorough analysis. So in this episode of my series, Talking Topics, I want to explore this infamous episode of television and highlight some of the aspects of it that tend to get overlooked. Whichever side of this issue you fall on, whether you're pro-punch or anti-punch, I bet you dollars to dingleberries you'll come away from this video with a deeper, perhaps even completely changed stance on the Arthur punch incident. And if you currently have no stance on it because you've never seen the episode, then I guarantee that by the end of this video, you too will have way too many opinions and feelings about a cartoon. So let's recap the events leading up to the punch. The episode begins with Arthur getting a new model airplane kit that he's excited to start working on. We get a montage of Arthur working diligently to build the plane over a series of days while DW repeatedly interferes in one way or another.
That's a pretty color. Ah! Bye! DW, don't touch that! The paint isn't dry! Ew!
Finally, after several days, Arthur finishes the airplane and decides to head downstairs to take a break and celebrate. While Arthur is downstairs, DW goes into his room and starts playing with the finished plane, eventually throwing it out the window, hoping it will fly.
There's a good breeze today, General!
But of course, it just plummets to the ground and breaks. And with seemingly not a single ounce of remorse or self-awareness, DW complains to Arthur that the plane doesn't fly.
Arthur, you made that plane all wrong. It doesn't fly at all. What?
They both go outside and stand over the remains of the plane.
I told you not to touch it! You built it all wrong! Did you even read the directions?
While DW criticizes Arthur for making the plane wrong, Arthur, apparently summoning the powers of Zeus, curls his hand into a fist and punches DW in the arm.
I told you not to touch it!
And for a brief moment, Arthur gets to enjoy a taste of that sweet, sweet revenge.
Tasty.
DW was probably also hoping for something sweet, but unfortunately, she found out that the only item on the menu at Cafe Arthur was the knuckle sandwich. By By the way, contrary to how many people remember this scene, we never actually see Arthur's fist come into contact with DW's body. We get a shot of Arthur throwing the punch, and then it cuts straight to DW falling onto the ground. And you might be thinking, but I remember seeing Arthur hit DW. Well, as a matter of fact, there is a copy of this episode where you do actually see Arthur hit DW. It's on a VHS tape in a vault, right next to Berenstain Bears books, spelled with an EI instead of an AI, and Fruit of the Loom clothing that has a cornucopia in the logo. Speaking of Berenstain Bears, did anyone else notice that the girl bear is dressed almost exactly like DW? So Arthur gets in trouble with his parents.
Arthur Timothy Reed, come here.
Uh-oh.
Then he's indignant because he feels like he's being treated unfairly.
Apologize to your sister.
No way! She should apologize to me. I worked all week on this. I told her 1,000,000 times not to touch it.
This means no TV for a week.
What? That is so unfair! You don't even care what she did to me!
Now, we're probably all on the same page that DW's misbehavior deserves some form of punishment, especially since throwing things out of second-story windows seems to be a pattern of behavior with her.
Here, DW, I made this paper swan for you. I want to see it fly. No! Look out below!
And I can't fault Arthur for being extremely mad. It takes a lot to push a guy like this to the point of violence. Arthur is a really nice, friendly guy, so if you've somehow found yourself staring at this, you done f***ed up. DW was always kind of a lovable brat throughout the series, but they really cranked up her annoyingness in this episode. Just look at this compilation of her annoying moments. And quick disclaimer, I am not responsible for any broken screens that result from people punching their devices in anger as they watch this. From the get-go, DW is annoying before Arthur even starts working on the plane.
Stop touching everything. You'll mix up the pieces. I've never heard of toys that come already broken. I'm going.
She repeatedly messes with the plane despite Arthur telling her not to.
That's a pretty color. Ah! DW, don't touch that!
She gets wet paint on her hands, then whines to her mom as if it's Arthur's fault.
Mommy, Arthur made my hands orange!
After breaking the plane, she expresses zero remorse and just criticizes Arthur for making a plane that can't fly.
You built it all wrong! It didn't fly for 1 second!
And even at the end of the episode, when Arthur comes around to apologizing to her, she continues criticizing him for making a plane that can't fly, and tries to absolve herself of guilt by saying she's just a kid.
I'm sorry I hit you. And I'm sorry I broke your plane. But what kind of a stupid plane doesn't fly?
A model plane?
Well, I didn't know. I'm just a child. Give me a break.
I suspect the writers made DW extra annoying in this episode on purpose to really make sure that viewers felt Arthur's anger and frustration. So DW was incredibly annoying and did something wrong to Arthur, there's no doubt about that. But the big question here is, did DW deserve to be punched? Is a punch too intense of a retaliation? You know, punching is an interesting thing. I don't think hands were really meant for punching, biologically speaking. It could be argued that throwing your finger bones into someone else's body is an off-label use of hands. Our fingers curl because they were meant to grip surfaces to help us climb and to pick berries off of bushes. But with one simple modification, our humble berry pickers become fearsome ass kickers. So I'm saying punching is a special thing. Besides humans, there's only a few creatures on Earth that even can punch. Apes, kangaroos, and apparently aardvarks if they're angry enough. This episode got me wondering if real aardvarks ever fight, so I searched for some videos, and what I found was pretty disappointing. When real aardvarks fight, it's a lot less dramatic than Arthur would lead you to believe. It's basically just a slap fight. So this is what the punch scene from Arthur would look like if it was realistic.
I told you not to touch it!
Also, here's an interesting little factoid I stumbled on. The aardvark gets its name from a South African word meaning earth pig, I guess, as opposed to regular pigs that are not from Earth. What does South Africa know about pigs that we don't? So DW has wronged Arthur, and I don't think it's unreasonable to think that a retaliation of some degree is in line. But at the heart of this issue is the severity of Arthur's attack. Was his retaliation proportionate to DW's misdeed? Did the punishment fit the crime, so to speak? If he had just lightly smacked her or pinched her, I don't think anyone would be accusing Arthur of going too far. However, as you dial up the severity of the attack, the moral wrongness increases. We can probably all agree that there is a hypothetical point at which a physical retaliation goes too far. For example, if Arthur had punched DW's bones into dust, we'd all agree he had gone a little too far. Well, maybe not all of us, it probably wouldn't matter to this guy who said, Arthur's only crime was not punching hard enough to cripple DW. And that's your friendly reminder that there are true psychos out there. So let's examine the severity of the punch. First of all, Arthur punched DW in the arm, which as far as body parts go is one of the more preferable spots to be punched. And also, if you're right-handed, it's even more preferable to be punched in the left arm. Actually pretty thoughtful of Arthur to spare DW's right arm if you think about it. However, upon closer inspection, it becomes clear that this is no ordinary arm punch. Arthur punched DW hard enough to knock her onto the ground. And when you consider how low DW's center of gravity is, it's obvious that that punch must have had quite a bit of force behind it. In fact, if we slow down the footage, we can see that not only does DW fall over, but she is also fully airborne before hitting the ground. That plane didn't fly, but DW sure did. And as I watched this scene over and over, I kept wondering, how hard would you have to punch a 4-year-old to send them flying backwards? Well, I paid a visit to a local playground to find out. So, I'm in jail. Seriously, this is a crazy punch. I mean, she is flung backwards with her legs parallel to the ground like a character that got hit in a fighting game. If there was an Arthur fighting game, this would definitely be one of his special moves.
AARDVAR.
KO!
Arthur wins.
You know what's the most exciting thing about winning? It's when you win. I love that feeling. It's not fair. It's not fair.
I feel like if Arthur's parents had witnessed the punch, they'd be like horrified and impressed by it. Arthur, go to your room and think about what you've done. Oh my God, that punch was insane. DW was in the air. She flew. Arthur could be a UFC fighter. And I don't mean when he's an adult, I mean now. I'm afraid to ground him. What if he punches us? I'm scared. So now that we've established the severity of the punch, we're more equipped to explore the question, did DW deserve the punch? Is wrecking something that someone worked hard on after repeatedly telling them not to mess with it deserving of a punch? This actually raises a broader philosophical question, which is, what is punch-worthy? If DW had simply pestered Arthur but never actually messed with the plane, or say DW did touch the plane but only messed up the paint again, a punch would probably feel overboard. But just like we did with the severity of the punch, if we increase the severity of the offense, we see that I don't know if acceptableness is the word, but the she had it comingness grows bigger and bigger. Now, even if you don't think the punch was deserved, you might think it was necessary. And those are two different things. A person might have to suffer out of necessity, even though they don't deserve to suffer. For example, the time I was driving to McDonald's in a rush to get some breakfast, and I ran over a guy walking through the parking lot because he was in my way. That man didn't deserve to be crushed by my car, but it was necessary for me to run him over to get to the restaurant. He was walking so slowly, and it was 10:58 in the morning. They stopped serving breakfast at 11. As many online commenters like to proclaim, the parents never stepped in to stop DW's misbehavior. It's really the parents' fault if you think about it. You can't just ignore your son's pleas for help while his sister is being a brat. Arthur was left with no other option. The punch was a last resort. However, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I would like to direct your attention to one very important detail of the events leading up to this incident that tends to get glossed over. Throughout the montage of DW continually bothering Arthur never once complains to his parents about DW. So of course they didn't stop DW from messing with Arthur's plane. They didn't know she was doing it. Now you could posit that maybe he did complain to his parents about DW. He might have told on DW every single time, but we just didn't see it. But folks, now we're just making things up. Sure, if you want to fly off into fantasy land, you could imagine that Arthur might have complained to his parents, but this isn't fantasy land. This is the real world we're talking about here, with real talking cartoon animals. Of course, you could say Arthur maybe did this and he might have done that, but as my grandpa used to say, if all that mattered were maybes and mights, then we'd all be babies in tights. My grandpa was kind of insane. The fact is, there is no evidence that Arthur ever complained to his parents before punching DW. That means Arthur escalated straight from verbally reprimanding DW to punching her. It's also worth noting that the punch didn't really work. Post-punch DW is still annoying and dumb in this episode, and she continued being an annoying brat in future episodes. So the punch didn't really set her straight. Some might argue Arthur didn't punch her hard enough to actually knock the brat out of her. In Arthur's case, the answer to was it necessary is, at least for me, a clear-cut no. There were other non-violent, or at least less violent options he could have pursued. You might disagree with me, but I'm right, okay? I'm right and you're wrong. You think I'm wrong? Stop saying I'm wrong. I'm not wrong. I'll punch you. Now, before you start forming your final opinion on this matter, there's one last question to consider here. Did DW fully comprehend the wrongness of her actions? Because the wrongness of one's actions is at least partially dependent on their awareness. If it was baby Kate that had thrown the plane out the window, people wouldn't be saying that she deserved to be punched. I hope. So was DW fully aware of how bad she was being by playing with Arthur's plane? And did she possess the empathy to grasp how it made Arthur feel to break his plane? Or was she just being a dumb, oblivious kid? She is only 4 years old, after all. At first glance, it might seem obvious that DW was aware that she was doing something wrong, but consider this. After breaking the plane, DW immediately goes and tells Arthur in a nonchalant, matter-of-fact manner. Why would she do that if she knew she had done something wrong? Wouldn't she be afraid to tell Arthur because she'd be afraid of the repercussions? It is possible that at the end of the day, DW was simply too young and dumb to fully comprehend the ethics of what she was doing. On the other hand, when DW goes into Arthur's room to play with the plane, she appears to enter the room in a way that looks like sneaking. It looks like she's kind of doing the classic sneak pose, which would imply that she knows she's doing something bad and trying to get away with it. By the way, what is the point of that pose? Does it make you quieter if you walk like this? Unfortunately, Mythbusters is off the air, so we may never know. Also, it's hard to argue that DW is too young and dumb to grasp the situation when you consider she's smart enough to know about the sound barrier.
Sound barrier broken. What's my next mission, General?
DW is young, but perhaps not that young. In fact, her mom is on record confirming that DW is a big girl.
Kate's a baby and you're a big girl.
She may even be smarter than Arthur, though that might not be saying that much considering Arthur seems to believe that he's an airplane. So there you have it. I can't tell anyone how to feel about this. I'm just here to lay all the facts out on the table. But for me personally, I don't like violence. So regarding this episode, I'm anti-punch. I don't think DW deserved it, even if she were more undeniably at fault than this episode portrays, but you'll have to make up your own mind. Interestingly, it's not just the punch portion of the episode that generates heated discussions. It's also how Arthur's parents react throughout the episode. One of the biggest complaints is that Arthur gets punished by his parents while DW gets off scot-free. It's an outrage that the parents act like Arthur is the bad guy and DW is blameless. Where's the justice? Folks, I got news for you. DW did get punished. The parents explicitly say that they'll deal with DW.
You don't even care what she did to me. We'll deal with what she did.
And Arthur's mom says to him,
But what you did is wrong, too.
what you did was wrong too. So they acknowledge that what DW did was wrong and she's going to be punished for it. I guess some people were too blinded by rage to see that. So let's just set the record straight here, all for one and once and for all. DW was punished. For all we know, she may have been grounded for a whole week, which actually wouldn't be a good punishment since Arthur already knocked her into next week. Better make it 2 weeks. The next part of the episode that really gets people's mouths a-yakking and their keyboards a-clacking is that after hearing about Arthur punching his sister, Binky gets peer pressured into punching Arthur. And Arthur's parents use that as a teaching moment for him.
It hurt and it was embarrassing.
Well, maybe that's how DW felt when you punched her.
Prompting him to finally stop being defensive and empathize with DW.
But what's that got to do with this? Binky Barnes is huge! Yeah, I guess I get it.
People also seem to think it's ridiculous that the parents don't do anything about Binky punching Arthur. Maybe Arthur's parents should go punch Binky. Everyone else is already punching each other. You know, maybe that's why Arthur doesn't have the long snout that he used to have in his original design. His face got punched in. Also, I can't say this for sure, but there may have been some underlying resentment behind Binky's punch. Arthur has a pet dog, and Binky is a dog. That's gotta be deeply upsetting for Binky. At the end of the episode, Arthur goes and thanks Binky for punching him.
Arthur, hey, I feel rotten. I want to apologize.
I just want to thank you. You made me understand how bad I made DW feel.
And that's the other problematic aspect of this episode. Essentially, violence solves the issue, even though the original issue was violence. So I guess the message is violence solves violence. So if you ever punch somebody and get in trouble for it, keep punching. You'll eventually punch your way out of it. This whole episode approaches the topic of violence from a weird angle. Rather than teaching that violence is never okay, it seems to be making the more specific point that it's not okay to hit someone who's so much smaller than you. It emphasizes the size disparity between Arthur and DW and between Binky and Arthur, as if that's at the heart of the issue. The episode even begins with a boxing analogy where they say,
We figured you'd rather fight someone your own size.
You're right. I would love to fight someone my own size. You wait here. I'll go find someone.
like the moral of the episode is that it's unfair for Arthur to punch DW because he's so much bigger than her. But in the series finale that aired a couple years ago, the show jumps forward to the future where the characters are all grown up and DW finally is Arthur's size. So let the beatings commence. As a final parting thought, I'd like to quote a famous proverb. To err is human, to forgive divine. I forget who said that quote. I think it was Garfield, but I believe there's wisdom in that idea, and even though Arthur is a show about animals, it's really a reflection on the human condition. Trying moments like these test our character, their crossroads, their opportunities to choose not only how we want to act, but also who we want to be.